And today, our subject for discussion is audiobooks. We have two guests in the studio, Martin Jones, who owns an audio bookshop, and Sally White, whose job it is to abridge or shorten books for the audio market. Now, I was amazed to find out just how popular it has become to listen to books on tape. What do you think is the reason for this? Sally?
Well, people are often very short of time. If you commute each day and have to spend, say, an hour in the car, then you can listen to part of a tape and then go on where you left off. And many people like to listen to audiobooks while doing monotonous household chores like ironing or dusting. However, I suspect that it's when people are trying to drop off at the end of a busy day that greatest use is made of them. I suppose it's like being read to as kids.
Yes. And in fact, these audiobooks have also become popular among children. I often listen to them with mine. I suppose the fear here is that children will become lazy. I mean, it's much easier to listen to a story than read it yourself.
Yes, of course it is. But I'm not sure this will necessarily put children off reading. I don't know. But the great thing is that they can listen to books which are far too difficult for them to read. It may mean, of course, that busy parents are tempted to put on a tape rather than take the time to read to their kids. But then I'm sure many would actually prefer to listen to professionals rather than tired mums and dads.
What do you think, Martin?
Well, I'd like to tell you about a lady who came into this shop just last week, and she was telling us about these family driving holidays to France, which used to be a disaster, with the kids in the back making a row, not being able to understand French radio. And she swore she would never take them to France again. Then she discovered audiobooks, and suddenly the journeys there are a joy.
Now, I hear that audiobooks are even more popular in the States.
Yes, it's certainly a huge, huge market in the States, although I don't think audiobooks started there. Maybe it's because there's a tradition here in the UK from radio of spoken words being an acceptable medium, whereas in America, of course, it's a different story. In the main, Americans don't seem to get as much drama or stories on the radio, so they're going out and getting audiobooks. And the principal attraction is that they need something to listen to because of the time they spend on the road. Places are so much farther apart. An audiobook passes the time.
And what are the reasons for sometimes asking the author to do the reading rather than employing a professional?
Oh, it depends. Obviously, the author is the one who's closest to the book, and they may have a particular interpretation of the book that they are anxious to portray. Most authors will have already done public readings of their books anyway, as part of their promotional activities at the time of publication, so they've probably read parts of it already. Otherwise, professional actors are used. We're very lucky in Britain to have such a wealth of actors who can bring the story alive completely.
Now, Sally, your job is to abridge books, especially for the audio market. I suspect a lot of people would say that you shouldn't mess about with what an author has written.
Oh, no, I don't agree. Most of the abridgments these days are really extremely good. Abridgers interpret the story in the way they believe the author has written it. But the point about abridgments is that one's adapting it to create a new version of the story, so it will inevitably be different to the original. Now, obviously, some books are easier to abridge than others.
Yes, I'd imagine a 1,000-page volume by Charles Dickens must be a bit of a nightmare.
Well, what we do is to trim the excess off, so it's more to do with the way they write. Beryl Bainbridge, for instance, writes so beautifully and sparsely that it's harder to cut into her than Charles Dickens with his pages of detailed descriptions. Well, this is probably the case with any kind of book.
We shouldn't forget that many books are not abridged before being taped. I would say that these have now grown to account for about 20% of the audio market. So, yes, some people do prefer to listen to the whole book. We've got Anna Karenina that has just come on the market. It's on 24 tapes, so you can imagine how long it is.
24 tapes? How long is a tape?
Well, each tape is about 90 minutes, and the whole set comes to £90. Though it's a lot of money, we're talking about a lifetime's listening, which is really something, isn't it?
Well, thank you both very much. And now...
Part 2. I'd been teaching art for about 10 years when I went on holiday to Greece. While I was there, I became really interested in the art of making mosaics and decided to include this in the courses I run. Many people assume that the Romans invented mosaic, but it was the Greeks who were the true craftsmen, and they, in turn, probably picked it up from the Sumerians. But it was the Romans who brought mosaics to Britain. And apart from the introduction of nylon backing to hold the tiles together, the techniques themselves haven't changed much over 5,000 years. It's the designs which have undergone a really radical change. In the recent past, modern mosaics have been restricted to the walls of public libraries and the odd swimming pool, and, by and large, it looked as if the true art of the mosaic could well disappear. Fortunately, that has not happened. People often ask me why I prefer to spend hours teaching my students to stick tiny squares onto tiles when I could be doing something else. And it's certainly the case that the process demands both time and motivation on occasions. It can even give you a really bad headache. But in fact, there's something very therapeutic about it. I think it has something to do with breaking things up and then reconstructing them. For every course I teach, we have jars and jars of brightly coloured glass, odd bits of china, broken plates and dishes, and most people just can't wait to start sticking them onto larger stretches of concrete. For the beginners, we produce mosaic packs, which contain all the essentials you need and explain clearly how to go about things. Each course includes a weekend workshop, which is attended by the majority of the students, and it's actually a wonderful way of relaxing. I'm often asked if I do puzzles, and it's not such a silly question as it sounds because it's a very good comparison of skills. Some people do get a bit scared, faced with all that choice, but that's why the mosaic packs are so popular. But I try to teach people to be inventive as well. If you look around yourself, there's plenty of evidence that the art is enjoying a revival. Not only do you see mosaic ashtrays and soap dishes, but you can actually now find them decorating underground station walls. Now, I'm not suggesting that you start pulling your own home to pieces and replacing everything with mosaics, although I often find myself looking at chests of drawers and thinking, just a border perhaps. Still, my reply to my over-anxious students is, all right, I know it takes hours, but after all, it's a labour of love, and you have something which will give pleasure for a long time afterwards. Now, if you're interested in trying out the effect in your own home...
Part 3. My guest today is the choreographer Amy Martles, who's put together many diverse dance productions, everything from classical ballet to modern stage musicals and experimental modern dance. The list goes on. Amy, tell us, how did you get into choreography in the first place?
Well, I got the performance bug as a kid. You know, we'd put on plays at primary school. Dance was a part of that, though it wasn't ever to the forefront particularly. Gymnastics was the thing I excelled at, and it was my sports coach who suggested trying private dance classes. She saw something in the way I used my body to communicate feeling and thought that might be worth developing. She was right. I naturally leaned towards rather athletic dance styles, and there wasn't much of a repertoire for that, so creating dances was the natural way forward. I like to do my own thing, and movement and gesture are a very effective means of communication. That whole idea's always fascinated me.
So, do you need to be a good dancer to be a good choreographer?
Well, when I was a dancer, I had the experience of working under a choreographer, and I keep reminding myself how that felt, how frustrating it can be when the choreographer just seems to be trying out ideas on a whim, and you're the guinea pig. You know, after a long, tiring session, that's the last thing a dancer wants. Any choreographer worth her salt would pick up on that and call it a day. I'm not sure you have to be an exceptional dancer yourself, though, and I know of choreographers who hardly ever set foot on stage themselves, and certainly couldn't reproduce all the steps. Because that's not the point, really. It's more what you bring out in others.
Sure. Talk us through how you go about creating a new dance.
Well, it really depends. Like, sometimes I'm commissioned for a show where the music, the narrative, that's all in place, and I'm working within those constraints, and that's the challenge. Other times, it's an idea that comes first, and I work with the composer to create something coherent that could be performed as an original piece of dance, and that's just as challenging, but in a different way. For that, I create the final version with the dancers, seeing what their bodies can manage, which moves are more achievable or visually effective. It can be pretty experimental and almost random, like you might see a movement that really works by chance if, say, a dancer slips and creates a particular shape and you make something of it.
Right. So, what do you aim for in your work?
Well, I have to feel that everything comes together as a unified whole, that we're saying something to the audience that's honest and meaningful. That means having harmony and balance in everything. The music, the dance steps, the costumes, and the lighting. And they're all equally important. Sometimes you can see a piece that has originality and groundbreaking steps, but performed on a set that's distracting, and the message gets blurred. I want to enhance people's perceptions, not confuse them. I want them to understand what I'm doing and the idea I'm trying to put across, so it's more about them than me, really. But it's certainly not about impressing them with flashy moves or anything like that.
I've heard choreographers are very choosy about which dancers they'll work with. What do you look for in a dancer?
For me, it's got to be someone who's ready to collaborate in anything and explore any options without preconceptions. I'm pretty intolerant of dancers who go in for introspection or whose egos need massaging. Actually, in some ways, working with students is more straightforward because they've got the basic training, they're desperate to learn, but they're not weighed down with expectations. I guess I like the idea of the blank canvas best. But if I am working with professionals, then it's more collaborative, and that's nice too. We develop a conversation about the work, and through that, something emerges. It's a coming together of minds, so always stimulating.
And if you're asked to work on a new production of a well-known piece, is it a very different approach?
I think I stay true to the spirit of the piece and to my own instincts. All art is created to speak to contemporary audiences. Even productions of historical dramas end up being about today's concerns. That's inescapable. But I wouldn't set out to change the underlying ideas in a piece. I know people will inevitably make comparisons with past productions, and I don't have a problem with that, but it's not my starting point. Actually, more of an issue for me is the gulf that people perceive between the experimental original piece and the new production of a known work, because it just isn't as wide as they imagine. Sure, the starting point is different, as are the practical considerations, but if you're talking about the essence, the choreographer's vision, her craft, if you like, then for me, there's hardly a gulf at all.
Part 4.
Hi, my name's Tim, and the topic of my presentation is a seabird called the albatross. It's the largest seabird, and it's always been a great favourite with sailors. It's also well known because it features in a famous English poem. The word albatross came into the English language via the Portuguese word alcatraz that was used for similar birds called gannets. The famous American prison island was also named after them. But the real origin of the word is thought to be Arabic, where it means diver. There's lots of different species of albatross, and scientists are always arguing about exactly how many. Over the years, estimates have varied from 13 to as many as 80. Nowadays, a figure of 21 is widely accepted, with 19 of those identified as being in danger of extinction. The albatross is mostly found in the southern hemisphere, and there's none in the North Atlantic. The bird travels long distances in search of its food, fish and squid mostly, and depends on the wind to a great extent. That's why you rarely find them in tropical areas where long periods of calm are common. The albatross manages to cover such long distances by conserving energy. Apart from takeoff and landing, it rarely flaps its huge wings, and actually there's a locking mechanism in its shoulder that keeps the wings in place as it glides through the air. As you'd expect, the bird's got good eyesight and will swoop down when it sees signs of food near the surface of the water. What I didn't expect to find, however, was that it can also detect the smell of its food. This explains why it follows fishing boats that use dead fish as bait. Indeed, one of the reasons the albatross is such an endangered bird is that it tends to get caught up in fishing nets. Another reason the albatross faces extinction is it takes a long time to reproduce. The bird can live for 60 years and only starts breeding from the age of 5. Even then, each pair of birds only produces 1 egg per year. They build nests on remote uninhabited islands because animals like rats, which arrive at the same time as humans, will eat the eggs and, predictably, cats will kill the chicks. Apparently even little mice can be a problem at nest sites, which is incredible. And, of course, the albatross has always been killed by people. Sailors used to eat them, and at one time their feathers were highly valued, which was actually the main reason. Even the bird's bones were used in certain ceremonies by local populations, though that wasn't on a big scale. These days, plastic is the biggest enemy, and there's tons of it in the sea. Eating plastic doesn't in itself kill an albatross, but it tends to stay in the stomach and so cut down the amount of food the bird can digest, which then weakens it. Some dead birds have even been found with weird things like plastic cigarette lighters and toy soldiers in their stomachs, as well as the all-too-common bottle caps. There must be a way of stopping those getting into the sea.